All right, good afternoon and welcome to today's Lunch and Look at Home Artist Talk with Sheila Pinkel. I am Jennifer Dickinson, Director of Education here at the Stark Museum of Art, and I am thrilled to have you here with us. Today we're going to be spending some time with Sheila, learning about her artwork. She's going to share some of the things that relevant to the works that are here in the museum now, but also her more recent works. Today, what we'll ask that we'll be using the focus mode, so you should be able to see me and Sheila and Sarah. And we'll ask that if you have any questions for today's program, to please use the chat to drop those. Sheila's going to talk for about 40 or so minutes, 40, 50 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sheila and we will get started.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for inviting me to this noon lecture. And I'm delighted to be part of your collection and part of the current exhibition. Because the work that's in your exhibition has to do with my phenomenological light works that I've been doing for about 45 years, I'm going to talk a lot about that early work, because most of it was done early on in my career, and then I've continued working on those things in recent years, but most of it is from the 70s and 80s. In the 70s, I discovered that I was fascinated by light phenomena, and I was going to UCLA as a graduate student, and I studied about light phenomena with a physicist who tutored me once a week in various phenomenological technologies. And by the time that semester was over, I wasn't a physicist, I wasn't a mathematician, but I had a sense that light was a substance and that I could use it like one might use paint, right? And so one of the things that I started to do was very fundamental things, like there's a light sensitive material called cyanotype, and it's a two-part emulsion that was developed in the 19th century by Sir John Herschel, and I could make that emulsion as a liquid and paint it onto large sheets of paper, and then put the paper out in the sun, or under a light sensitive light that was ultraviolet. It had to be ultraviolet because it's only exposed by ultraviolet. And then I could make exposure. So in this case, I had a very large piece of paper, and I have a friend who was willing to plop herself down on it and in the sun, and she'd lie there for a while till the exposure took place. And then I'd simply wash the paper off with a garden hose, or sometimes they had a big trough and wash it off. And so, what was amazing about it is that I was able to get incredibly fine details about the person on this paper, just as a photogram of the person on the paper. And so this is another one. You can see her mouth, you can see the bottoms of her hands, the bottoms of the feet, and those, I think I was on there too. Those are my feet and her hands. And this is another one where she's on the paper standing, and then there's chicken wire above her. So I did many of these. I found some bed springs in the alley behind my studio and dragged those in and made a huge work, including those bed springs. And then I made this 8 by 20 foot mural. It was a commission by a large apartment complex in LA. And these are all cyanotypes with various objects that are, and some of them are on there through photographic negatives that are put on there as well. And then I took a piece of paper, etching weight paper, and ran it through an etching press and dimensionalized the paper. It's three-dimensional now. It looks like there's a rope on it, but that's the paper. I coated it then with cyanotype emulsion, put it at an angle to a carbon arc lamp that's an ultraviolet light source, and exposed it And so you see that there's black or there's dark areas that are next to the light areas. Those areas where it's dark is where the most exposure happened. And it's as if the paper cast its own shadow on itself. And so it's a two-dimensional and three-dimensional. And then I began to realize that I could sculpt photo paper that was coated with photographic emulsion. I could make a three-dimensional sculpture of it, the paper, put it at an angle to a light source. And this is 30 by 40 inches. This is a pretty big piece of paper. And then turn on a carbon arc lamp and expose it, and then wash it out. And it flattened out while I was washing it out, and it became a two-dimensionalization of itself when it was a three-dimensional. And I considered those time-space paradoxes. I called them time-space paradoxes. And I did all kinds of works using this idea. And so then I started doing this with silver print paper, black and white paper. This is a 16 by 20. It's very simple, but again, it's nothing more than the paper and light. Nothing's on it. And so that I realized that the planes that were perpendicular to the light source got the most exposure, and as the paper rolled away from the light source, it got less and less exposure, and that's what's happening here in this work. And then again, with photo paper, I began making very structural sculptures and then exposing them. In this case, to just a 1-point light source, just a regular light source. It wasn't UV to make this exposure. And again, it ended up being very flat. And this one is quite large. It's like 52 by 52 inches. And it was done the same way. Again, I took this black and white paper and wrapped it around the top of a jar and made this shape and exposed it and got this image. And then I took a piece of paper, it was photo mural paper. This piece of paper is, it's called Luminous. It was from Germany. And I found that kind of paper worked very well for this exploration. This piece is 24 by 52 inches. And again, I wrapped the center of it around the top of a jar and sculpted the rest of it and put strings on it. And the strings cast their own shadows on the paper and you can see them lightly running through horizontally on the paper. And then as I continued to work, I began to find more and more forms in the paper itself. It was an extraordinary experience. It was as if I went beyond just structural forms and found these more magical forms, more mysterious forms for me. And just in the paper itself, this is nothing more but paper and light, but somehow I found this new language that was, and I experienced that as something like hidden somewhere between me and the paper. It was somewhere inside me, and it started, the paper was revealing another aspect of itself that I had no idea was possible. This is small, it's 16 by 20 inches. And then I started working larger. I got glass rods, big ones. This is 24 by 52. And then I made combinations of glass rods on the photo paper and sculpted photo paper. This is a very large one. It's 48 by 96 inches. Again, it's just light and paper, and it's perfectly flat. So then from there, it's certainly not a linear, because I was doing this over a period of many, many years, from like 1974 to 1982. I was also doing lots of other things during that period. And so I found this glass dish. And, I'm always worried about whether I tell the story or not, because I hope it won't compromise my profile for you too much. But this was a glass dish that I found in a in a Japanese restaurant. We had ordered sushi and there was ginger that had come in this glass dish. And I was 30 years old and I looked at this glass dish and I have no idea why I wanted that glass dish, but I really did. And there's something about passionate curiosity that has really run itself through my life continuously. And this was no exception. This glass dish just called to me. So I had never stolen anything in my life, and I took it. I took the glass dish home, and I had no use for it. I stuck it on my shelf. But then at some point when I couldn't think of something to do, I took it into the dark room and I started making photograms with it. A photogram is an image that's made on photographic paper where you just put something on top of the paper, expose it, and then you get an image. And so because this is glass, it refracted. And so then I made hundreds. I would go back into the darkroom periodically with this glass dish. The first time I went in, I made 20 or 30 images, and then I thought I was done, but I thought, oh, there's some that are really nice. I think I'll go back in there again and in a couple of days and do it again. And every time I went in with my glass dish, I found brand new images that never had occurred to me before. And so then I began to get two insights. One was I was in love with the possibility that this simple object could have infinite form in nature. That idea was so interesting to me. And I just was on fire with that idea. I wanted to know how many forms could I make out of that glass dish. And even if I exhausted what I could dream up, it was only, there's plenty more that I couldn't imagine, I was sure of it. So this was part of a wall that was 8 by 20 feet, filled with these glass dishes that I organized. Each one of them is 5 by 7 inches, and I organized them to be kind of like visual music. And so then I took one of those glass dish photograms and took it to a color Xerox place. And at that time, color Xerox technology scanned for red, cyan, magenta, and yellow. I think it was green, blue, and red separately. So between each scan, I could move the photogram. And so it got new colors by the time it was done. It was cumulative colors. Every time I scanned it, I moved it a little bit, and then I got all this cumulative color, which I was very fascinated that was another possibility for this glass dish, using a different technology. And then I used cyanotype. I again coated paper with cyanotype emulsion, and then made the XYZ axis of the dish on the cyanotype and made these 4 images. And then I took some of the black and white computer generated photogram images, and I went to the USC School of Engineering Image Processing Laboratory that was in downtown LA at USC. And there I had the technologist scan 2 of those images on a drum scanner for 256 shades of gray. I was over there doing, I was over there doing a lot of work as an artist. They let me come in, and they were very generous to me to let me as an artist play with their equipment and so on. So this was one of the things I had one of them scanned for 256 shades of gray, and then put that digitized information on a CRT, a cathode ray tube, which is what TVs were called at that time because of the technology they were using, and a permutated color through the gray levels of that image. And then I photographed, I stopped that permutation when I liked the image and took a picture of it. And then I took the slides that I got from those photos and projected them into a color Xerox machine. And these are color Xeroxes that came out of that process, right? That lock process. But I also made a film that of the colors permutating through one of those cubes that's called Intuition. And at the end of my talk, if there's more time, I'll show you the film, right? But this was, I made a matrix of 9 of these to show the potential for the color permutating through the gray level of the original scan. And these are X-rays. These are mammograms, actually. The mammography was developed by the Xerox Corporation in the 70s. And while I was at USC School of Engineering, I saw this technology. I saw an example of it. It was roses. It was an X-ray of roses, and they were magnificent. They showed the internal structure of the roses, and it was so delicate. And the beauty of this technology, this X-ray technology, is that because it was developed to reveal cancerous breast tissue, it showed much more delicate, it could reveal much more delicate tonalities than conventional X-rays could. And so I took my glass dish over there to see what would happen if I X-rayed it, right? And it looked completely different, very different in its X-ray refraction than the light refraction that I was doing with the black and white ones before. And the blue color, it was the color that was chosen because doctors told Xerox that they liked the color blue. And because this was a medical technology, they listened to the doctors and put blue toner into the machines to make the images. So that's why it's blue. And so all of this work became part of an exhibition that was called Manifestations of a Cube. And it was held at the Los Angeles Municipal Gallery in Barnsdale Park. And that was in 1978 or 9, somewhere in there. And, you know, I have to say that passionate curiosity has really been the main motive in my life. And I have learned to listen to that voice. And I have always, as a teacher, have always tried to get my students to listen to that voice as well, because I think that that's a profound voice in a person's life. And so I did not know why I was doing this. I was just curious. And then, but I discovered that every technology that I was using suggested its own appropriate manifestation. It suggested it to me. If it suggested it to you or somebody else, you would think of different things, but this is what I thought of to do, all right? So I did, and so I had to write a statement for this exhibition. And I had no idea why I was doing this work, except that I was curious, right? But I had to write a statement. And then I began to think about this project, and I thought, okay, cube, this cube, plus my mind, plus whatever technology I'm using, resulted in dozens of black and white ones, 4 cyanotypes, 9 matrix of computer generated ones, a couple of X-rays, a film called Intuition, and some other things, and a Xeroxes, right? Each one of those technology had its own manifestation in terms of structure. If I change the language and I said art, artness instead of cubeness, art plus mind at any historic moment. In this case, I said Black, Latino, Asian, or white mind, plus whatever technology those artists are using, is going to result in a democratized model of art history at any given moment. And so this was a paradigm that moved this from my own artwork to a model for democratizing art history. And I had done research. I worked for the state of California as a researcher on a legislative committee, and I put myself through graduate school doing social science research. And I wasn't a trained statistician, but I had a knowledge of research methodology. So I decided I was going to test out my paradigm. So I applied to the Los Angeles Bicentennial Committee to an exhibition called Multicultural Focus. And I was going to get 3 curators from the Black, Latino, Asian, and white communities to all curate the show. And we were going to spend a year looking for work to curate. And we did. And my show was one of 2 shows that was selected by the Bicentennial Committee to go forward. And so we spent a year, I spent a year trying to find, and that's a huge long story, which I don't have time to tell right now. But, and finally we curated all, and it was a multicultural curatorial team. And it worked. It absolutely was incredible, because what we discovered is that almost without exception, all the Asian artists, and they were all Japanese for some reason in the show, all the Asian artists were doing artwork about the tension they felt about being Asian and being American. And there were some wonderful stories about that. For instance, that sort of articulated history in an unexpected ways. Like Wayne Kawada was photographing himself as John Wayne. And so I said, Wayne, why are you doing that? And he said, well, my parents were in Manzanar, the Japanese internment camp during World War II. And when they got out and they had me and my brother, they wanted us to be as American as possible. So they named me Wayne after John Wayne, and my brother Gary after Gary Cooper. So that's why he was photographing himself as John Wayne, right? And I mean, there's many, many stories that came out, that bubbled up. Nobody had any idea that that's what Japanese Americans were doing at that time, right? And then most of the work done by the Black community was about the universality of the human experience. Almost without exception, that's what they were doing. There was just a few. Daniel Martinez was one of the few Latino artists, and he was doing kind of satires of fashion shows. And then most of the white artists were doing abstractions, color abstractions, because color photography was starting to be accessible. And so that's what they were doing. But it really did reveal, and also the larger curator said, okay, we're going to put all the work that's in a black and white medium in one part of the museum, and all of the work that's in a color medium in another part. That meant that all the Latino and Black artists were in one section, and all the Asian and white artists were in the other section. And that was not, I mean, didn't hold on totally, but pretty much. And so when I asked well, so why are you doing that? Because many of them had been through grad school, they knew how to do color. They chose black and white because they preferred it at that time, right? So anyhow, it was an amazing experience, and it kind of proved my thesis of how important it is to democratize the field of art, because otherwise it's a pyramidal art history, especially at that time, with mainly white guys at the top of the pyramid. And this completely leveled it. Was another paradigm. And it all came from my cube. I had be out of this passionate curiosity, and it never occurred to me I would end up with this social science exhibition that demonstrated this paradigm in another way. So another piece I did on the XYZ axis was a glass cylinder on a photo paper, and it's a combination of a photogram of the cylinder and folded paper. And then I got a hold of some glass rods, and I began to experiment with them on photo paper, and discovered that when the glass rods are perpendicular to each other, you'd have a whole series of them horizontal on the page, and then put some perpendicular, you get this very delicate rivulets of refraction on the photo paper. And then what I did is I took that image, this black and white image, and took it to a color Xerox machine. And again, I moved it as the machine scanned, and I was able to add a color dimension to my black and white image, right? And so then but then if you took the glass rods and instead of having them perpendicular to each other, I made them more and more parallel to each other on the paper, then I got these huge refractions, beautiful. And I started painting with that idea of glass rods and refractions. And again, I added color to it using the color Xerox machine. And so here's a few of the other ones that I did. I did lots of them, but I'm just showing you a couple of them, and then their refractions, right? So you can see that I was having a pretty good time, right? And so, and then here, this is a very large piece. It's a whole bunch of them that I put together of glass rod refractions on multiple sheets of paper. And then I x-rayed, this is a mammogram of those glass rods. It's X-ray refraction of those glass rods, and it's very different than visible light refraction. And then I was at the Xerox a medical research facility, and there is a funny story. You know, they actually, I had seen this technology at USC School of Engineering, and I got really excited about it. And you know, I am a shy person, and I've always been a shy person. But when I really want to do something, I really want to do it. So I called up the Xerox facility, and I said, you know, I just saw this technology, and I'd like to come and make some art. And they said, we don't allow artists to come in here, so you can't. And so I said, I just started pestering this guy. I said, I would call him back and I'd say, oh, do you think you could talk to the head of the department and see if he'd let me come? So he finally said, okay, you can come next Friday from 1 until 4 if you promise never to call me again. So I promised. And then I went there, and it was fabulous. I put objects on a charged selenium plate. A charged selenium plate is something that is in a standard Xerox machine. That's how you get an image, through an electrostatic process. Well, the same concept was true here. You put a charged selenium plate into a box, a lead box. You put stuff on top of it, close the box, zap it with X-ray. Wherever the charge hits the plate, it changes. Wherever the X-ray hits the plate, it changes the charge. And then you put charged toner on the plate in a Xerox machine, and you get a print. So the concept, right? So this is a whole artichoke, right? It's just showing the internal structure, which is breathtaking. It's like one would never know how beautiful. And I was able, I don't think I have it here. I could push a button and make it go positive or negative. So I have a positive and negative of this image, actually. And then this is a nautilus, a whole nautilus. I was able to see the internal structure of that shell. Grapes, you know, and you know, this appealed to me really as a graphic artist. The beauty of these grapes were so marvelous. And then 3 shells, the XYZ axis of the same shell from 3 different positions, right? So you can see the beautiful internal structure of these shells. You have to understand that I'm showing you just a tiny bit. I have over 500 images that I did over a period of 4 years intermittently. Shrink wrapped fish, and I think you have that one, right? And you have to understand. So after that weekend, when I'm looking at all these things that I had done, and I was like in heaven. I was just fascinated by the images. I couldn't help it. I called the guy back. I said, can I come back? And he was really pissed off that I called him. But then one of them got published in a Time Life book on photography. And then he called me, and they said that I could come back once a month on a Friday and do it. So I did it for quite a few years, and they were great to me. They gave me a technician. They gave me all their out-of-date paper to use. Everything was free. And so then and when you're doing this kind of work, you know, never know what's going to happen. And so in terms of, and I wanted to do some fish, big fish. So, and I was very poor at that time. And so, you know, I walked into the fanciest seafood store in Santa Monica Seafood, and said, do you have anything I could borrow? And I was describing this process to the guy, and he said, I have just the same. And you know, you never know what you're going to say when you ask a stupid question like that, right? So he went back, and he came back, and he's holding this gigantic piece of plastic, and he had just cut off both sides of flesh off of a gigantic tuna. And he gave me the middle of it in this big piece of plastic. So I took it to the Xerox facility and piece by piece shoved it into this machine and made a big, this is 8 of those x-rays of this big fish, right? So anyhow, that was great fun. And then I did other things. I mean, I have lots of multiple connected images of these things, but I did a series called Who Owns Nature? And this was the last piece in it. This is peas, and this is a little shell, and these are onions, right? And so I started to put text with it in this whole series of 8 of them. And then another light phenomenological project I did at that time was things called Goethe Gardens. I had read a book about that Goethe was actually in love with light phenomena, and he had many friends who are opticians and lens makers in Holland and Germany, and he had prisms all over his house. He was fascinated by prismatic light phenomena. So he had a book that had some illustrations, and when I first read it, I didn't understand you're supposed to look at those through a prism. But then the next time I looked at them, I realized, oh my God, light is bending in really interesting ways through that prism. So then I started making Goethe Gardens. And Goethe Gardens were black, gray, and white environments that were illuminated by 1-point light source. And I have a big prism. In the middle of it, there's this blocky thing on a stand that you can see. It's a square thing in the middle. That's a big prism. It's a big piece of lucite that's made into a prism. And there's some foot pieces right in the front of the image. And then it says on the floor, everything that lives strives for color. And that's a saying by Goethe. So when you walk in, everything's black, gray, and white. But when you looked at it through a prism, it started turning into color. And it kept turning, getting more colorful. And the color kept changing in your mind's eye as you kept looking at it through a prism. And all of my work at that time, and still actually, is about this notion of transformative vision, that things aren't static, they're dynamic. They have multiple presences in the world. My manifestations of a cube piece was like that. My folded paper pieces were all like that. You know, changing from black and white to Xerox color was like that. And this is another manifestation of the idea of the transformative possibilities of images in nature, right? And I did many, many installations. Some I added polarizing film and cellophane. If you look at polarizing at cellophane through polarizing film, it becomes incredible color. And so you would have 2 different ways to change what this looked like if you look through 2 different things in some of the installations. So then relatively recently, I made a big piece. It was some of my glass rods that I then put together on my computer. And this is 44 by 84, it's big. And I showed it on the island of Cyprus in a show I had there. And I brought a big prism with me, and people could see it, and then they could look at it through a prism, and it turned into brilliant color. I'm sorry that all of these images are over to the right. I'm really sorry about that. I don't want to quit though. And then I did this other piece where, you know, I'm in love with, you know, symbols from mathematics and from physics and from the ancient world. And so I put together this big piece, again, meant to be seen through the prism, because when you look at this through the prism, it just turns into this kaleidoscope of magnificent colors that keep changing as you keep looking at it. So, you know, there's a lot of other work that I've done. I have many different, I have three main strands of work. I'm a political artist. I've done a lot of overtly political work. In the 80s, I was doing thermonuclear gardens about the growth of the military industrial complex. And then in the 2000s, I've done, they're called incarceration gardens. That's not the right name, but it's about the military industrial complex. I've been really, for the last 22 years, I focused on the military industrial complex. And I've also done a lot of anthropological work. I photographed in refugee camps in Thailand, and I published several books about the Hmong experience, HMONG, and about the Cambodian experience during the Indochina Wars. I've done books about weavers in Varanasi, and some other books as well. So, but then, and when I had that show, but I'm going to now circle back to my Lightworks, because I'm going to finish with my current Lightworks, because I had done the multicultural focus show in 1980. In 2010, there was a Getty initiative to have exhibitions in LA that had to do with work that was generated from 1960 to 1980 or 85 in LA. So my multicultural focus show, which there was a catalog of that show, fit into that category. And I applied to recoup that show, only have the artists who were in the original show do their current work. So I had that show in 2010, and I had to make a catalog for the show, and I didn't know what to put on the cover, and I could not figure it out. So for some reason, I took the lens off my camera and just stuck it on my flatbed digital scanner and scanned it. And all of a sudden, all this color came through my lens, and it was gorgeous. And I thought, my God, you know, this lens is a metaphor for all color, you know, color coming through the lens, but all cultures using that lens as well. So I used that image of the lens, and with all of its color on the cover of that that catalog. And then I began to scan lenses. Now, you have to understand that I was the only person who got through graduate school at UCLA without ever using a camera. I was doing completely experimental things while I was in graduate school. And so, but then I began to realize that every lens has its own unique refractive fingerprint. And so I started scanning lenses, right? Breathtaking images that are nothing more than the lens put on my flatbed digital scanner, and my getting all these images that then I make prints out of, right? I've done over 500 lenses all over the country. I just was at the California Museum of Photography scanning their brand new lenses that they just received. And so these are a few. This is from the 19th century, some of these lenses. I'm just showing you a few examples. This lens, it kind of looks like an eye, because you're able to see the eye, the aperture that's in the middle of the lens. And this was a lens that was owned by Man Ray. It's a 19th century lens. It's a British lens. And sometimes I show them wide open and stop down, because I think that combination of those two aspects of themselves, again, like all my other stuff, I like the transformative nature of wide open and stop down, right? This was a lens from the early 20th century. It was a lens that's from Rochester, New York. Rochester, New York became the epicenter for optics technology in the 19th and 20th century in the United States. The University of Rochester had a department of optics, one of the first in the country. And so they were generating all these PhDs in optics who then had to figure out what to do with their PhD. So they started optics companies in Rochester. And this lens was a result of one of those companies. And it's got Bakelite on the outside of it, so you can see in the workings of the lens. And actually, early on, the lens elements were glued together. And now, because of the time that's gone by, that glue is disintegrating. And so but it adds another dimension to my scan, which makes it pretty interesting. I like looking at it. But all of these were without lens coatings. All of the ones I've just shown you do not. But then in the 20th century, as the lenses began to get more and more elements, as we got telephoto lenses that had 5 to 10 elements, the optics of lenses are that every time light goes into a lens, it reflects at 3% of that light. And when it went out of the lens on the other side, it reflected another 3%. So you lost 5 to 6% of the light from each element, and you might have 5 to 8 elements in it. So as the lenses got longer, you lost less and less light. And so they had to figure out a way to stop all that reflection. And they started coating lenses with these lens coatings, which then resulted in breathtaking scans on my part, refractions on my part. So then this is one of them done in the mid 20th century, from the mid 20th century. Another one where you're starting to see all kinds of extraordinary color coming from that scan. And this one, I mean, I only put a few of the more recent ones in here. This is a lens that was a Canon lens. It ended up being on the cover of Leonardo magazine, which is an art, science, and technology publication. And I'm an editor of Leonardo. So they put it on the cover for the 50th anniversary. So that I'm still scanning lenses. I'm a lens junkie. I never occurred to me I couldn't stand. I was totally uninterested in lenses when I was in school, and now I'm really interested in lenses, and I'm always looking for repositories of lenses. I'll go anywhere with my scanner and scan lenses, right? And I've gone all over the United States with my scanner. So I don't know. I'm going to stop here. And I don't know if there's any questions or anybody who wants to, talk. I have a 5-minute film that I could show, but I'll stop and see if there's any questions.
Well, let's pause for just a minute. I know I have a couple questions, Sarah. I'm sure you have a few as well as we are chatting. Sheila, one of the things that struck me as you were talking about, you started your conversation today talking about cyanotype and the historic processes. Was my understanding is that those processes were not popularly used at the time you were using those. Am I correct in that?
Right, they're just a little bit. That's right. They weren't.
Okay, so that was not something. So those were relatively new. They were things that people were not seeing. I just wanted to make sure people understood. While it is an older process, they really weren't processes that you were seeing.
No, the only thing is that Bea Nettles. I had taken a workshop with Bea Nettles, who had taught that process in her workshop. That's where I became aware of it, and I started doing it after that workshop. But she was the purveyor of that technique. Nobody else, I had never seen it before.
And you talk about coming into photography at the graduate level with really very little camera experience.
No camera experience. No. Okay.
Yeah, and so I was curious if you could kind of back us up a little bit and tell us how you came into photography, into the cameraless photography. How did you wind up working in that?
That's a funny story. Well, I mean, my temperament was like that anyway. I mean, I did take pictures. I take a lot of pictures, and I like to take pictures with a camera. But at that time, I was very much interested in experimental photography. My first semester, I did take pictures, but my second semester, I was getting more and more interested in experimental photography, and I had been studying with this physicist, and my camera was stolen.
Oh, okay.
But I actually didn't miss it. that propelled me even more into doing this experimental work. So that's how I got into it.
And then I guess the other thing that struck me with this as well, scale seems to be working very large scale seems to be something consistent throughout your career. I've done cyanotype. I've mixed the chemistry when you're talking about this large wall size mural of cyanotypes. What drove you to work so large and so frequently so large?
I don't know. I mean, it's sort of like you start small, and then it occurs to you, well, I could do it bigger and bigger. And then, you know, once you get the hang of what you're doing, you start to think larger, I guess. And then I, like for my folded paper pieces, you know, I had been restricted to conventional size paper, but then I discovered luminose. I could buy a roll of luminose from Germany that was 52 inches wide and 100 feet long. And that was the kind of paper that I wanted because it had a soft surface, it had a tooth. So it had a little texture. And that texture was great for what I was doing because I was putting a light source at an angle to the paper so I could see that texture, right? And it was terrific. And so I could cut up the paper any size I wanted. And in the beginning, I was replicating 16 by 20, but then I'm going, wait, hey, I don't have to just do 16 by 20. So that's gave me, and the others, and I had made rain gutters to process these things that were not particularly good. I mean, it was a way I was doing it, but it wasn't very effective. I lost a lot of prints because I wasn't able to do it very well. But then I started working in a photo mural studio in downtown, Art Lichty's photo mural studio. He was the photo muralist for LACMA. He did all their photo murals. He had gigantic trays. 4 by 8 foot trays of developer and fix and stop and stuff like that. And so, you know, I could just put my whole piece into a tray and develop it. It was like heaven, right? And he let me work there free. He was really great. So that helped also, right? So, but you know, like I'm less than 5 feet tall, you know, and I'm sculpting these things that are 4 by 9 feet. You know, it was fun. It was like great. It was like really interesting with 1 point light source, and it exposed those things. For just a second, it was this economy of means that where there was nothing on the paper, really. It was the paper. So I don't know.
I'm going to ask a specific question. You showed 2 shrink wrap fish from Safeway. Can you tell us a little bit more about the genesis of that piece? Like when you went down to the Xerox Center, did you have like a big bag, a suitcase full of objects that you were going to do? How did you decide to take 2 fish and their shrink wrapping?
Well, the thing is that I was always looking for things to take. And you know, I went through the repertoire of vegetables, right, and other things. I was always going over to friends' houses and borrowing stuff. I went to the Fowler Museum and borrowed stuff. So I had called the Museum of Science and Technology, and I asked them if they had anything, because they had all kinds of animals, you know, in their storeroom. And I wasn't sure that was the right thing, but they said, well, we got some stuff in our freezer. And so we'll let you have it. But then when I got down there, they said, we changed our mind. You can't have it, right? And so I was on my way to doing some x-rays, and I now had nothing to take, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to stop by Safeway and see what I could find. I mean, it's a very mundane way that I did it, but that's the story. But I'm in love with fish. I mean, they're so beautiful. The internal structure of fish is incredible. I did one piece of just the tail of that big tuna that is a magnificent structure. And so I was in love with what happened when I x-rayed those fish.
Then to sort of change focus a little bit, you mentioned teaching. Would you share with us some more about your philosophy of teaching, or how teaching has affected you as a photographer? We have a number of teachers that will be watching this.
Well, I approach teaching photography because I've never been a typical photographer, although I know how to do it. And because I studied a lot about optics and physics. And so I knew usually more about those things than most photo teachers did, actually. But my philosophy of teaching was that I wanted my students to find their own voice. And I actually didn't much care, that was the main thing. And I worked very hard with each of them to find their own voice. And certainly photography, especially intro photography, is magical for them. Watching these things come up in the trays and it's fun for them. But I wanted, and the other thing, I made them read a lot. I wanted them to understand the embedded, sociologically embedded language in a picture. I spent a lot of time getting them to understand the language of photography, and that it's not neutral, and that every single element in a picture affects the content of that picture, and that they are the architect of that language. And so I wanted them to understand that. And I also wanted them to not be afraid to fail. I wanted them to just listen to their curiosity and see what happens, and not know where they're going, because our culture robs most of those kids from being listening to their own voice and being experimental. And they all think they have to know what they're doing, and they all think they have to know what they're doing for the rest of their life. And I wanted them, I wanted them to realize that you could take an odyssey of your own curiosity and see where it takes you, and it will take you to marvelous places that you never imagined in the first place. And if you can just listen to it. And also, it's the most wonderful way to live. And there's nothing more fun than taking that adventure. And it was sort of like trying to flea bite them. Like, if you once have that experience, that marvelous experience of that adventure, you will never want to replace it with anything else. So that was really what I was trying to do.
Well, I have another question from a colleague of ours out at the Dishman Art Museum at Lamar University. Dennis Keel is asking, where is that glass cube today?
Oh, it's right here on my desk.
Never far.
Yeah, I hang on to it because, it's my sacred object, right? But one time I was giving a talk about it, and to graduate students in Illinois, and we broke for dinner and we came back, and those kids had all gone to a bar to get some drinks, and they had come back, and the drinks were served to them in square glasses.
Of course.
So they all brought me their square glasses. This is funny. Yeah, this glass dish is right here.
Well, I'm going to thank everyone for joining us today. This has absolutely been a pleasure. I've learned so much. I'm excited and inspired. I want to encourage you to come out to see the Enlarging the View Contemporary Photography and Connections exhibition. It is on view through Saturday, August 27th. 3 of Sheila's works are included in that exhibition. And we would love to have you come out and stop by and see them. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next program. Bye-bye.